Today, we're jumping into the life of one of the most brilliant and, frankly, influential minds in all of Western history, Saint Augustine of Hippo. But this isn't just some dusty theological lecture. His story is this incredible human drama about a man totally torn between his own genius and his vices. And that journey would end up shaping philosophy and Christianity forever.
You know, this one quote, this single desperate cry, it just captures everything about Augustine's struggle. Just try to imagine it. You're a master of philosophy, one of the sharpest minds of your generation, but you feel completely, hopelessly trapped by your own worst habits. This line comes from a moment of total shame for him, right before his entire life changed, and it really sets the stage for the conflict we're about to explore.
So, where did this all start? Well, to really get the man, we've got to go all the way back to his childhood in Roman North Africa. Because right from the very beginning, he was shaped by these two powerful and completely opposite forces. On one side, you've got his mother, Monica. She was a deeply devout Christian who literally never stopped praying for her son's soul. And on the other side, his father, Patricius, a pagan who was all about worldly ambition, status, getting ahead. So you can just imagine young Augustine, right, pulled between these two worlds, the call to faith and the siren song of secular success.
Well, when he got sent off to the big city of Carthage for school, the worldly side won, big time. I mean, he was brilliant, no doubt about it, but he poured all that brain power into a life of pure indulgence. He lived for pleasure, had a son with a woman he never married, and chased fame and status with the same fire he would later use to chase God.
And what's so wild is how self-aware he was, even back then. He tells this now famous story about stealing pears with his friends when he was just a teenager. And he realized something profound. He didn't even want the pears. They weren't even good pears. The real thrill, he said, came from the act of doing something wrong together. That insight into the psychology of sin, well, it would stick with him for years.
But here's the thing. Augustine wasn't just a party animal. His mind was always working, always churning. He was on this restless, relentless intellectual quest. He just couldn't accept easy answers. He was desperately looking for some kind of belief system, anything, that could satisfy his massive intellect and his soul.
And you can literally track his search for truth by looking at a map as he moved across the Mediterranean. Back in Carthage, he got pulled into a trendy new religion. In Rome, he started his own school and toyed with skepticism, the idea that you can't really know anything for sure. And finally, in Milan, he lands this super prestigious teaching job, and that's where he runs into two things that would change everything: ancient Greek philosophy and a Christian bishop who could actually go toe-to-toe with him intellectually.
Each of these philosophies gave him a piece of the puzzle, but none of them had the whole picture. Manichaeanism had a neat explanation for evil, but it felt, well, too simple. Skepticism was great for his critical mind, but it just left him with nothing. Neoplatonism, though, that was the real game changer. It gave him the intellectual tools to finally grasp the idea of God as something spiritual, something non-material. And just like that, the last big intellectual wall between him and Christianity started to crumble.
So his mind was pretty much convinced, but his will, his actual ability to change his life, that was still completely paralyzed. And this whole internal war came to a head in this little garden in Milan, in what's become one of the most famous conversion stories in all of history.
Augustine was just in agony. A friend had just told him this story about two regular guys who had instantly converted and changed their whole lives, and Augustine was just flooded with this incredible sense of shame. He knew what was right. He believed it in his head, but he felt totally powerless to actually do it. He literally ran out into the garden and just collapsed, weeping, feeling completely and utterly broken.
And that brings up a question for all of us, right? What do you do at your breaking point? When you know you need to change, but you just feel like you can't? For Augustine, the answer came from somewhere totally unexpected. So as he's sitting there weeping, he hears what sounds like a child's voice from a house nearby, chanting this little song, Tale lege, which is just Latin for take up and read, take up and read. He immediately took it as a sign, a command from God. He raced back to where his friend was sitting, where he'd left a book of St. Paul's letters. He just grabbed the book, opened it to a random page, and his eyes landed right on this passage. It was like it was written just for him, speaking directly to the very heart of his struggle, that battle with his worldly desires. And in that one moment, he said, all the darkness of his doubt just vanished. The long intellectual journey was finally over. This quote really gets to the heart of what happened to him. He didn't describe it as some cold, logical conclusion. He described it as, well, finally falling in love. All of his searching, all his running, all his pride, it just gave way to this moment of total surrender and this incredible, burning peace. He had finally found what he'd been looking for his whole life.
So what happens after a lightning bolt moment like that? For Augustine, it wasn't about quietly retiring to a monastery. No way. It was the beginning of his true life's work. He took all of that immense energy, all of that genius, and just poured it into serving the church.
And his path was incredibly fast and decisive. No hesitation, he gets baptized by the great Saint Ambrose himself. Then he goes back home to North Africa, gets ordained a priest, and within just a few years, bam, he's made the bishop of the city of Hippo. And that's the role he would hold for the rest of his life. And get this, the man was tireless. The master of rhetoric, who used to want fame in the emperor's court, was now using all those same skills to explain scripture to everyday people. It's estimated he preached over 6,000 sermons. He poured everything he had into his new life.
I love this little detail because it tells you everything about the real change in the man. The guy who used to thrive on pride and gossip now had a strict rule against it in his own home. It was this simple, practical sign that the inner transformation was real. He was actually living what he preached.
Now, even while he was serving his local community in Hippo, the things Augustine was writing were shaping the entire future of the West. His impact on Western thought, it's almost impossible to overstate it.
I mean, he left behind a library of absolutely game-changing books. His Confessions isn't just his life story. You could argue it's the world's first real autobiography, this incredibly deep dive into his own psychology and soul. And then there's The City of God, his massive response to the collapse of the Roman Empire, a book that would shape political and religious thinking for 1,000 years.
It's really staggering when you think about it. His ideas became the pillars of Western thought. He's the one who really formulated the doctrine of original sin, which completely shaped how Western Christianity sees human nature. His idea of two cities, one earthly and one heavenly, influenced centuries of political philosophy, and his attempts to figure out the ethics of war laid the foundation for just war theory, something we still debate today.
From Martin Luther all the way to modern philosophers, pretty much every major thinker has had to grapple with Augustine. He's officially recognized as a doctor of the church, which is a title saved for saints whose teachings are considered absolutely essential. That troubled young man from a small town in North Africa really did become one of the key architects of Western civilization. And that kind of leaves us with this final question. Augustine's story is ancient, but his struggles feel so incredibly modern, don't they? That search for truth in a world with a million competing voices, the feeling of being trapped by your own bad habits, that deep, deep longing for a purpose that satisfies both your head and your heart. How does a 1,500-year-old story of a personal breakdown and breakthrough still echo our own search for meaning today? Thanks for joining us.